welcome to How to Sell More. Today, we are talking about value propositions and customer-centric marketing. Really, why do people buy? And we are talking with Stacey Danheiser. Now, Stacey's the founder of Shake Marketing Group and the co-author of the book Value-ology. She's also been in the game for over 15 years, shaking up things in telecommunications and in cable and financial services with her customer-first strategies. If you've ever struggled to get a prospect to really see how crazy amazing your product or service is, then this episode is for you. I'm Mark Drager. Let's get into it. So Stacey, you've written a bunch of books and you're a speaker and you are super deep into the B2B marketing world. So today we're going to be talking about value for customers, developing a value prop, but specifically for B2B business owners and heads of sales and heads of marketing and all of us who are responsible for creating value within organizations, especially in B2B. But you sent over a few topics before we kicked off, and I found one of them super curious because I think I understand value. I think most successful salespeople, most marketers, most C-suite, we understand value. And yet you sent me a note saying, no, we tend to get this wrong. So what do we tend to get wrong, or why is value misunderstood?
Yes. I mean, I love this topic. Value is one of those words that's thrown around in businesses, and we kind of all assume that we know what it means. So value simply is, what we would exchange for somebody else to give us money, right? And the reason that it gets so confusing is because value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And we tend to think of value in our terms, what we would value, and we can't imagine that somebody would not value the same thing as us. So very seasoned salespeople kind of understand this concept. I work with a lot of CEOs, I work with a lot of marketers, I work with a lot of even sales professionals that get this confused because they think they know what the customer values, and they kind of push to talk about what they want to talk about. And they kind of forget that it's not about them, it's really about the end user. So a perfect example is when companies are out there talking about cut costs. We help you save money. We help you cut costs. Well, that's all well and good. Maybe that resonates with 80% of customers, but there's the 20% that they're not interested in cutting costs right now. They're just trying to grow, or they're trying to go fast, or they're trying to launch new products. And so if you come in with we're going to help you cut costs message, it doesn't land because it's not relevant.
Oh, that's such a good point. I worked with an entrepreneur, a business owner a few years ago. I tend to be very, I'm not cheap because I spend a lot of money on a lot of things, but I tend to always look for ways to get the most out of every investment. And I naturally assume the people I'm working with want to get the most out of every investment. And I was working with this entrepreneur and we were developing their brand and assets and strategy and go to market and everything. And frankly, I thought they were kind of just throwing money around. Like I knew that they had budget, but some of the investments they wanted to make just seemed silly to me. And so I pulled the business owner aside without the team there. And I said, listen, I don't think that we should be spending money in this way. I see why it's nice, but it's not needed. And this business owner said, Mark, you have to understand, most people in my situation, they'll go out and they'll build the house, they'll take the vacations, they'll get the Lamborghini, they'll do this stuff. He said, my business is my Lamborghini and I want the very best. And I went, oh, okay. And I appreciate that he told me that, because from then on, I wasn't going to talk about money anymore. You know what? If he considers his business to be the thing that he wants to spend his time, his energy, and his money on to have the best of the best of the best, it's a totally different value set than mine. But I learned in that moment to respect that. And so how do we approach this idea? If I think you probably come across this, I come across this a lot, where I sit down with a business owner, I sit down with, again, C-suite, decision maker, head of marketing, head of sales, and they go, I know my customers. And I go, do you? Like, the ones who love you, the ones who say yes easily, the ones who move forward with you, but you don't really know the people who aren't the best customers or the best prospects or the people you're losing or the people you're not even winning over. And so how do you go about finding out all of the different value sets or the different ways to segment our audiences so that way we can understand if people are price conscious versus not, versus all these other values they may have?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, yes, I come across that a lot. We know our customers. And the thing that we all have to realize is, unless you're a salesperson selling sales solutions to other sellers, the reality is you're probably not the end target customer. And so we have to think about, and there's a million different ways you can slice the customer database, right? When I do customer research for clients, I always find it interesting because they will, of course, default to give me the quote best customers to talk to, which is great because, at the end of the day, for marketing purposes, we're trying to replicate the ideal customers. And these are people that, the company is saying, yeah, we love working with them. They're ideal to us. Now, what's interesting is that when a neutral, third party interviewer, go in to talk to these customers, they give me the real story of what it's like working with this company. They give me the real story of why they came to the company, what problem they're solving, what they could be doing better. And I always, get them to divulge a little bit of information about, how they would rank them. And it's always surprising because there's themes that come up. There's information that comes up back to the company that they've never thought about before. And several are always surprised because the company would, the customer would rank the company a little bit lower on the scale than the company would like to think. And so I always find that really fascinating. And I always like to think of value and how to talk to customers and kind of the information you're getting back into kind of three different buckets. So, the company's job is to create value, communicate value, and deliver value. And so when I talk to customers, I like to understand and kind of bucket the feedback into those groups. How are we doing with creating value? Do we have the right products? Do we have the right services? Are we innovative? Are we helping you in your business? Are we doing what we promised? The communicate value is what we were kind of just talking about. Are we relevant? Are we resonating with you? Are we providing content and education and tools and things that are ultimately helping you be a more educated business owner or, run your business unit? And then the deliver value, of course, value propositions are just a promise of what's to come in the future. We don't actually experience any value until we start using the thing. And so the delivery piece is really important because often companies are, they have the sales team, they have the marketing, they're spending a ton of money on marketing and sales. And then they kind of throw it over the fence to a junior customer success person to go manage the delivery of the entire thing that they just sold. And, this is where like the operational excellence comes into play. A lot of customers have feedback on that delivery piece because, they want to be able to talk to somebody. They want to be able to get a hold of somebody. They want it to be easy to implement. And so I kind of look at that whole sort of cycle as to when I'm talking to customers, like, where do we have opportunity to improve here? And it's not just marketing, right? This expands, this is like a whole business sort of mindset of, the whole sort of customer life cycle and all the people and all the departments that are touching it. So
it only takes a single touch point or interaction that goes uncorrected to really tarnish a relationship. I used to, I've been in service-based businesses for a long time, and I've always found that with a really strong value proposition, selling is easy. Now, delivery is hard, and keeping things sold can be very, very challenging. But
yes.
When I'm working with people, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You mentioned the idea of the promise being made. We need to not only communicate, I think we need to prove. I think people are very cynical, they're very skeptical, and we have to constantly prove ourselves. But there's this idea of the brand promise, or if we don't want to use such
Fluffy.
jargon, fluffy. Yeah, it really comes down to I am either going to explicitly or through, I guess, more subtleties, get you to a point where I am committing to something. Like I'm committing to drive value for you. I'm committing that we will do a great job. I'm committing to some kind of value to you, as you mentioned in the value creation. So I'm making a promise to you. And I've seen two things: either organizations that vastly overpromise and then underdeliver, as you just mentioned with the junior rep, or I see people who are afraid to make claims, to make promises, to go out on the ledge, to put anything forward, because they go, well, if I make this claim, if I say something bold, if I do something different, if I make a promise and then we don't deliver on it, then that would be terrible. And so what I'd love to run by you is, I always think that it's not marketing's job to dumb itself down for poor operations. It's operations' job to live up to the promises that marketing simply must make in order to close the deal. Now, I'm not an operations guy, so that's super easy for me to say, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, it's your job to live up to the claims we're about to make. But the way I look at it is if we have to make a certain promise, if we have to show up in a certain way, if we have to make a certain claim in order to win the business, then heck, like do whatever you have to do to live up to this promise. Do you see it the same way as me, or is there really another way to look at this?
Well, I love that view. So I worked in large corporations. My background, I spend a lot of time in Fortune 500 companies. So I got to see this. I worked in cable and telecom, and I got to see this kind of play out in real time where operations was failing and marketing and sales was, trying to put lipstick on the pig, basically, right? Like we got to keep selling and we got to make this thing look good. But once you get in, beware, it might not go as planned. There was a huge focus in the company on operational excellence. And I think that's really, I like that value cycle as a visual, because it's like we can create the best products and we can have the best promise, but if we are not delivering, on our promise and what people say, then our whole business falls apart. And so CEOs understand that view and they're like, okay, we understand maybe where things are broken. Everybody thinks it's a marketing and sales problem. And it's, sometimes it is, but often it's one of these other levers it needs to be fixed as well. I think the other piece that's interesting is like understanding, what is table stakes in the industry? What's like the bare minimum that you have to be able to provide in this product or service just to like even have your foot in the door, just to even be considered. And that's kind of when you talk about delivery, like I think of this is like where we all need to agree, like this is table stakes. We have no business if we can't do these basic things. And then you can kind of add the layers on to that, of companies striving to be like the Patagonias of their industry or the Apples of their industry. I think a lot of people are operating bare minimum with these aspirations to be like some game-changing thing. And it's like typically what's broken is like that commitment, that culture to excellence, that culture of experimentation and trying things and learning and evolving and just growing there. So I think it's definitely a cycle. And ideally, marketing's job, this is my view, marketing's job is to connect with those customers and to get that feedback that ultimately goes back into the business to inform what the business is working on and what they're prioritizing. And so it's a matter of closing the loop with customer feedback so that everybody knows what to do with it. Otherwise, it's like, well, that was interesting. We got some customer feedback and we updated our homepage copy on our website. Well, there's a lot more you can do with it than just updating the homepage copy on your website.
I've often thought, we had a client we were working with for many, many years who was I don't even know how to explain it, which is not great, but they essentially had fire-rated cables. And so for every public building, there is a law that states that if the building is burning to the ground, communications cables to the fire equipment and to all of the emergency stuff has to be able to operate for 2 hours in a burning building.
Wow.
So what a strange, weird little client. What a strange industry. Anyway, they had a fire-rated cable that was the best. It was the best of the best of the best. Here was the problem. It cost more money. It was longer lead time. It was more challenging to install. Distributors didn't understand it. And end users did not want to order it or install it because it was higher human. It was just worse to install and work with because it was the very best product. And so the client came to us and said, how do we sell this? And it's like, how do we sell something that is in a lab setting much better? And everyone agrees is better. But if you're doing a 20, 30, 40, 80, $150 million investment, do you really like, does it matter if something is 20% better if the other thing still passes code?
Yeah.
And is cheaper and is easier to install and people like it? Like, how do we do this? How do we put that lipstick on a pig? Or how do we get this thing sold? And so inevitably we do tons and tons of research and we come down to the fact that it's just like, there's this one environmental aspect of it. Oh, the competitors' cables are carcinogen or, they cause cancer when they burn and put off all these toxic fumes and stuff. But then we had to figure out ways to just demonstrate this and prove that it was true and not get sued and all of these other things. And so I can understand in these really complex situations, it's one thing to say value and it's another thing to actually do this. Mm-hmm. How do you tend to handle or how do you recommend clients go about these really challenging situations where you have a product or you have a service or you have a company and you know that your service is equal or better in some ways, but frankly, because of things outside of your control, commoditization or marketplace or competitors, like you can't go back and redevelop something brand new. You have this thing that simply must get sold. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple of things. So one is the concept of differentiation, right? What you're talking about, and I think it's interesting where there are product-led companies, engineering-led organizations, where they focus on this aspect of differentiation that nobody cares about. That it's the piece. So that's problem number
Yeah,
one, right?
that's true. It's like a bunch of people who are really into this
Yes.
invent and create these things, never asking how the average user would look at it.
Would care. Yeah. And so one tool, by the way, that everybody can use to help sort of understand this concept is the Bain pyramid of value. Have you used this? The B2B pyramid of value. I like this one as a visual because it shows, different things that, like, concepts that people would care about. And I think I would start there with, what does our customer base really actually care about? And in that situation you just talked about, ease of use, ease of implementation has got to be probably at the top. If you're deploying hundreds of thousands of these cables, or in multiple buildings, like, that absolutely is a critical aspect to get right. So that's kind of number one, is building differentiation. That's one of my favorite quotes is like, just because you're unique doesn't mean you're useful. Okay, so that's basically that concept. The second piece, I think, is the other one you were just talking about. A great one, and where I see many companies kind of failing when they talk about value or value propositions, is proof points. And so it's ideally you understand what makes your product unique and different and useful, and then you are able to measure that. So how do you measure the value that you're providing? And I think a lot of value propositions are weak because they are empty promises, right? And so anything we're going to transform your business. Well, we are all now like rolling our eyes at the word transform because it's so overused and it's been so overpromised, that we are very smart humans and very smart consumers. And so we don't believe it. And so you have to find a way that is like, how can we measure and put some proof points around something? So in those situations, in kind of complex products, I always look for like little nuggets, little insights. Somebody has bought this thing. Why did they buy it? What is it solving for the business? And try to find like some patterns that might emerge from those particular businesses. So are they all in the same industry, for example? Do they happen to all be in the same location? Are they all the same potential stage of their business life cycle? Do they all have kind of a similar background in terms of like maybe engineering or associations that they're all part of? I mean, there's always like kind of little different things that you can find to almost like create a segment. You're kind of like pulling a little niche and you're trying to create a little niche in the market. That's like, we have found this random niche. Hospital managers, tend to really like that. Great. Then we're going to go. It's like, we have to go sell this thing, find your niche first, and then go try to replicate that. And a lot of companies just don't do that at all. They don't really understand customer segmentation. And so that's like one of the things that I try to teach marketers and try to help companies with is, let's just look at some patterns and things that are emerging from your current customer base. Some people are buying this and they bought it for a reason. And it's typically not obvious, I'd say.
What's always crazy to me is how many businesses are so bad at this and yet still successful. And I had a client who worked for an organization, a large organization. They've been around for 170 years. And they had like no call center, no inbound. They sold through distributors with zero brand presence, zero marketing assets. And I mean, it was basically like they just had locked up all the distribution for like Hitachi equipment and like just a bunch. They just locked up the region. So if you needed this equipment, you had to come to them. I mean, this is a publicly traded company. I said, if you are this successful without any of this stuff, imagine how great it would be if you just started implementing some of this.
Yeah.
And so I know that you have some strategies. There are a few different ways, I think 4 different ways that we can go about doing this type of market research in a way that is achievable and that we can kind of handle. So walk us through those 4 key areas for researching this value prop.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first high level, just what most people do to come up with their value propositions, they sit in a room with each other, internal people at the company, and they talk about what's our value proposition. Okay, let's throw some stuff at the board and we'll see what sticks. Okay, that one sounds good. Let's go with that. So there's when I like to look kind of more big picture and to figure out, are we really going to make a mark in the market? So there's four key areas that I like to look at. So the first is, of course, market research. So this is, the market in marketing that most companies are skipping. And this is having a sense of what is happening in the industry. What are the trends? Do we understand our customers' industry? And do we know what's driving things? Is it, because not every industry is the same. And so it's really having a deep understanding of what's happening and what the trends are there. So, companies can get better at that simply by prioritizing and just spending time on it, right? A lot of people are subscribing to industry newsletters. Maybe the CEO probably, and maybe a couple salespeople are. I'd say my experience is that a lot of marketers are not doing this. They're not subscribing to these things. So that would be my advice, is like, find a couple of good ones and make sure that your team, your marketing and your sales team, who are interacting with customers all the time, are absolutely have their pulse on the industry. So that could be associations, publications, et cetera. The second is competitor research. Now, this is another one that companies tend to do once, and specifically it relates to product. Oh, well, we're creating, the product engineering team is doing competitor research because we're comparing our product to somebody else's product. But ideally, the organization is looking more holistically at the competitor piece. And I know there's kind of varying thoughts about this. On one side of the equation is, hey, our competitors are irrelevant. We're so much better. We don't even have to think about them. We're just going to be heads down and build our business.
Hold on. Do people that's not true? That's not true.
They do. This is
literally if you're listening
advice.
And you're like, yeah, I'm better, that's great, but that's not true.
Yeah. And not only that, but I think it's naive to think that I like to say that this approach is very naive and it's completely the opposite of customer-centric, because customers are evaluating you against something else, whether that means they're doing it themselves, whether that means they're using a completely different solution, or whether that means they're doing nothing. They are solving their problem somehow, some way today before you even come on the scene. And
not only that, I think most people are so caught up in their known competitors, the people that they may be going up against for, say, a pitch or an RFP or even in a purchasing decision. So everyone knows that they have those competitors that you're up against and you hate. But then there are all of the secondary competitors. There are all of the non-direct competitors. They're the competitors who are actually taking budget or disposable income or attention away. Or there's the competitors who are just frankly stirring shit up. And, if right now with the global economy, the what's happening with interest rates, and what's happening with the idea that recession can be coming for the last 2 years, that's we have to compete against that. Because if you want to try and get organizations to be able to move forward with something and make investments that are long-term, they may be hesitant to do so right now, just simply because we have to compete against the press. So there's always competition we have to be going up against.
Yeah. And the big one too, so my colleagues and I did a bunch of research for one of our books on the sea of sameness. And the reality is a lot of people are stuck in the industry mindset and they just kind of copy each other. And so let's not even talk about the product, but we're talking about communications now, how companies are communicating what they do and the value they bring. And a lot of them are using the exact same words, the exact same YS statement, the exact same jargon. And so if you are not doing any competitive research at all, then chances are you're probably creating something that is like just feeding the sea of sameness engine. And so if you want to be different, you have to know what you're up against, right? And so that's what I'll say about that. And again, each kind of person should really have an understanding of like the competitive landscape. To your point, here's our direct competitors. Here's some of the lesser known indirect competitors. And then here's the reality of like what percentage of our deals end in no deal, no decision. What percentage of people are trying to DIY it? And like knowing that is also a competitor that you have to compete against. So that's number 2. Number 3 is customer research, of course. And so this goes back to that Bain pyramid, I think is a great start to really just start getting into that. Also, my recommendation, not just because I do this, you can use whoever, but that you should really hire somebody to do formal customer research at least once a year, because you're going to get a completely different story from a neutral third party than you are when you just go put a salesperson or a marketing person or the CEO to do customer interviews. Also, customer interviewing is a skill set, and not everybody has that. And so I've found that there's classes that you can send your team to, but you have to really be in that journalist mindset to be able to do customer research. So that's like primary research. You should absolutely be doing that, and talking to customers. The other piece is secondary research, of course. So reading literature and subscribing to newsletters and associations that are like in your customer's world. Google Alerts obviously is a great one. Annual reports or listening in on investor relations calls. If you have any public companies that you're targeting, that's a great way to get some insights, like where's the company focused? What are they struggling with right now? Because they tend to divulge a lot of information that can be useful in the sales cycle for you there. So that's on the customer research side. I have like a whole kind of training program and things that I do on that just to get like marketers in this mindset. I don't know. We have, over the past 10 years gone so far away from marketing is now all about the tech and how to implement, new technology to get like mass communications out, versus marketing is about understanding our customer and having it be the central department that is really sort of owning customer insights and customer research, and not just sort of that short-term bias that the sales team typically has. Hey, I just got off of a call and we need to go change our whole entire pricing strategy, or we have to go update this piece of content, or we have to go participate in this event. Those are all great, but they're very short-term. And so you really need somebody that's overseeing like big picture, long-term, what's happening with the customer base. The fourth one, just real quick, is company research. And so what I mean by that is like, what do you understand about your own company? What are the goals that you're really trying to achieve? I find that a lot of, and what are you really good at? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And being honest. So you want to really hone in. If you know what makes you different, if you know what your strengths are, if you know what your company's trying to achieve and your mission and all of that, ideally, your value proposition is painting a story that's leading everybody to that as the solution. And a lot of companies just they can't answer that question, or maybe one department can answer that question, but everyone is not aligned. And so when you're not aligned, then you're going to have this inconsistent story out in the market, and you're going to have an inconsistent story from one seller to the next, or from one executive to the next, or from the marketing team versus the sales team. And so that piece is really important.
I think you've really helped articulate something that I've been thinking about for a while now. Last year, I read J.D. Rockefeller's biography. I listened to it a few times, by Ron Chernow, a Titan, great book. But what I found interesting is in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, let's go way back. Marketing was something that was around, but at the time, it was about finding a market and creating a market. And I've thought about that because, as you mentioned, marketing is about it's about tech, and it's about brand, and it's about advertising, and it's about lead gen and lead qualifications and lead scoring and working the leads and doing everything you need. And then it's got to touch product and product development. Like, it does all of those stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't, but at its core, what it was 100 or 200 years ago, because it's been around for that long, is find a market and create a market. And so what you're talking about is getting back to basics, which I love and I could talk about all day. So I've been speaking with Stacey Danheiser, and she is the founder of Shake Marketing Group, also the author of Look Inside, The Real Reason You're Not Winning the Marketing Game, and a co-author of 2 books, Value-ology and Standout Marketing. So Stacey, I end every single conversation by asking the same question, but I'm going to switch things up today because I'm actually curious. What is your favorite question to ask when you're doing customer research?
I mean, I like to, let me think about this. Which question? There's so many. I tend to run the interviews like pretty more like a conversation, but I always love to know, like, the question of value, of course. What is the primary value that you're getting from this organization? I love that question because people will give you the exact words that they need to hear and that they need to see on a website or in a sales pitch. They'll say, and it's like, that's what you pull out and use in the marketing. We don't need to go be all fancy. When you ask that question, what's the number one value you're getting? They're like, I don't have to think about it. Like they just deliver. And so I can go run my business and do whatever I want. And this thing I know is just going to work. And I don't have to worry about it. But I'm like, that's great. That's the value, right? It's typically not things when I ask companies this, they'll never even think about that. They won't say that, oh, the number one value we give is, we have the best expertise, or we have some other like random feature. And that stuff never comes up in customer interviews. It's always like bigger picture, higher level. It's typically related to a feeling or something that people are getting to do because they're working with a particular company.
Okay, to wrap up this conversation, let's get into the 3-point roundup. Number 1, value is subjective and it changes from customer to customer, from business to business, from prospect to prospect. And the number 1 mistake that I see, especially entrepreneurs making, but anyone who's newer to sales, is we tend to think that everyone values what we value. And that's just not the case. Number 2, staying ahead in the market means that you really need to understand both your direct and indirect competitors. So you need to recognize that your product or your service isn't just about features, but also how you position yourself against the competitors in the marketplace. And number 3, you're going to go so much further, so much faster if you just close the feedback loop between your customers, your prospects, and your product, your operations, your sales, your marketing teams. Like close the loop between what real people want and what they say and what you offer. And so a big thank you to Stacey Danheiser for joining us. To learn more about her, to check out her books, to give her a follow, really, you can find her on LinkedIn. You can connect with her over there. You can visit her website. It's shakemktg.com. You can also, while you're over on her website, check out her book. It's a best-selling book, Look Inside, The Real Reason Your Organization Isn't Winning the Marketing Game. And while you're busy over on Amazon or maybe her website or over on LinkedIn, you can also give me a follow as well. You can head over to LinkedIn. You can find me there. My name is Mark Drager. I'm the guy with the black and white pic with the blue background. If you want to find me, if you want to send me a DM, if you have a question for me, I would love to hear from you. And one last thing, if you've made it this far into the show, you probably should subscribe. And here's why. Every single week, we share strategies and tips just like what Stacey shared with us today to supercharge your business growth and to help you sell more. So with that, I'm Mark Drager. We will catch you in the next episode.